My father died believing I had no home, then left me a piece of coastline everyone said the ocean would soon swallow. My family wanted me to sell it. A powerful company wanted me gone. But at the lowest tide, my retired German Shepherd discovered stone steps hidden beneath the sea. At the top stood an abandoned rescue station, carrying the name of the teammate I had failed to bring home. What we found inside would expose a deadly secret, tear my family apart, and force me to enter one final storm. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories about courage, loyalty, family, and the second chances that can arrive when we least expect them. The day my father left me 37 acres of drowned coastline, my older brother smiled as though he had just watched someone bury me twice. The first burial had happened overseas. At least, that was how it felt. My body had come home from war, but some part of me was still trapped beneath a moonless sky, listening to gunfire roll across a village I could no longer find on any map. The second burial happened inside a law office in Port Alder, Maine. While rain crawled down the windows, and my father's attorney read his final wishes to the 3 children he had left behind, I sat at the far end of a polished table that probably cost more than everything I owned. That was not saying much. Everything I owned was parked 2 streets away in an old green pickup with a rusted rear bumper and a heater that worked only when the road was smooth. A canvas bag of clothes rested behind the driver's seat. A military sleeping roll filled most of the truck bed. A coffee tin beneath the passenger seat held $28 and some loose change. My home had 4 worn tires, a cracked windshield, and a German Shepherd named Rook. Rook lay beside my chair with his chin resting across the toe of my boot. He was 10 years old, nearly 90 pounds, black across the back and shoulders, with deep brown legs and a narrow scar above his left eye. A blast during our final deployment had damaged his hearing on one side and left a piece of metal buried near his shoulder blade. The veterinarians had removed what they could, the rest stayed inside him. I understood that. There are some things a man carries, because cutting them out would cause more damage than leaving them where they are. My name is Caleb Ward. I was 51 years old that winter. For most of my adult life, I had served as a United States Navy SEAL. I had crossed rivers at night, entered buildings where armed men were waiting, and trusted strangers with my life was because the patch on their shoulder matched mine. Then I came home and discovered I could not stand in line at a grocery store without counting every exit. I could not sleep in an apartment because footsteps in the hallway sounded too much like boots approaching a door. I could not keep a job because sooner or later someone dropped a metal tool, slammed a cabinet, or touched my shoulder from behind. People called me unreliable. Some called me angry. Most stopped calling at all. Rook never did. Across the table sat my brother Everett and my sister Helena. Everett was 6 years older than me and had spent his entire life working beside our father at Ward Marine Supply. He had inherited our father's square jaw, heavy hands, and talent for making every sentence sound like an order. Helena was 4 years older than me. She managed 2 waterfront rental properties and a small inn overlooking the harbor. She dressed carefully, spoke quietly, and had a way of looking at a person that made him feel as though she had already calculated the cost of his mistakes. Neither of them was evil. That would have made things easier. They had sent money once when my truck broke down in New Hampshire. Helena had called 3 shelters after learning I was sleeping near a railroad yard. Everett had offered me work unloading boats at the marina. But help from family can come with an invisible receipt. Every meal was remembered. Every missed shift was remembered. Every promise I failed to keep was added to an account I could never repay. Our father's attorney, Judith Crane, sat at the head of the table. She had known us since we were children and had once stitched a cut in Everett's forehead with fishing line when a storm trapped everyone on an island. That morning she looked older than I remembered. Her silver hair was pinned behind her head. Her glasses rested halfway down her nose. A thick envelope lay unopened before her. My father, Henry Ward, had been dead for 12 days. A heart attack took him in the machinery shed behind the marina. Everett found him beside a workbench, with one hand still wrapped around a wrench. That detail had bothered me more than death itself. My father had spent his whole life repairing things. It seemed cruel that his own heart had broken while a tool was still in his hand. I had not seen him during the final 5 months of his life. That fact sat with me at the table. It sat heavier than grief. Our last conversation had ended with him telling me to come home before winter. I told him I did not have a home. He said, "That is not what I asked." I hung up. He called again the following Sunday. I let the phone ring. He left the same kind of message he had left many times before. There would be several seconds of silence. Then he would say, "The harbor light is on." That was all. No accusation, no demand, just those 5 words. "The harbor light is on." I saved every message. I answered none of them. Judith opened the envelope. Outside, a fishing boat sounded its horn somewhere beyond the rain. Rook raised his head. His ears moved toward the windows, but his body remained still. I rested my fingers against the thick fur behind his neck. Judith began with the business. Everett received controlling ownership of Ward Marine Supply, the repair shed, the equipment yard, the fuel contract, and the family's commercial dock. His expression did not change, but his shoulders loosened. He had expected the business. He had earned it. Even I could admit that. Helena received the Harbor House Inn, 2 rental cottages, our father's savings accounts, and the remaining shares of a seafood warehouse near Rockland. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Then Judith described several smaller gifts. Money for grandchildren, a boat for Everett's oldest son, our mother's jewelry for Helena's daughters, a donation to the volunteer rescue station. My name did not come up. I stared at a dark knot in the wooden table. Rook shifted closer until his shoulder touched my leg. I had told myself I expected nothing. That was almost true. I did not expect money. I did not expect the business. I did not expect the old family house where I had broken a bedroom window at 14 and learned to shave at 17. But I had expected some sign that my father remembered I existed. A compass, a fishing knife, the brass watch he wore every day. Even an old coat would have been enough. Something that carried the shape of him. Judith reached the final page. She looked at me before she spoke. "To my youngest son, Caleb Ward, I leave sole ownership of the property known as Greyhaven Point, including all shoreline rights, structures, tidal access, timber, mineral rights, and any contents remaining within the legal boundary." The room went silent. Rain tapped the window. Everett looked at Helena. Helena looked down at the papers in front of her. Then Everett exhaled through his nose. It was not quite a laugh. That made it worse. Greyhaven Point lay more than 40 miles northeast of Port Alder, past the last paved road and beyond a stretch of forest where storms regularly brought power lines. The property occupied a long finger of land reaching into the Atlantic. Half of it was salt marsh. The rest was rock, stunted spruce trees, and cliffs that had been collapsing into the sea for generations. There was no electricity, no maintained road, no working well, no safe harbor. Local fishermen called it the drowned finger. My father had bought the place decades earlier, after a shipping company abandoned plans to build a storage yard there. As far as I knew, he had never used it. Everett leaned back in his chair. "Does the deed come with a rowboat?" he asked, "or does Caleb have to swim out at high tide?" Helena gave him a warning look, but she did not defend me. Judith continued reading. "The property shall pass to Caleb without division, condition, or obligation to the other beneficiaries." Everett's faint amusement disappeared. "Without division?" "That is correct," Judith said. "What about the taxes?" "They are current." "For how long?" 3 years have been prepaid from a separate account." Everett looked at me. That was when he smiled. It was a tired smile, not a happy one. The expression of a man who believed a lesson had finally been delivered. "Dad left you a flooded tax bill and paid enough to make sure you could not refuse it immediately." I felt heat move into my face. Helena folded her hand. "Caleb, Greyhaven Point has been assessed before. There is almost nothing usable there. The marsh is protected, the cliffs are unstable, even the access road disappears during storms." "I know what it is. You have not seen it since you were a child." I said, "I know." Her voice softened. "That land will not solve your situation." My situation. That was the family name for what had become of me. Not homelessness, not trauma, not the slow collapse of a man who once believed he could endure anything. My situation. Judith reached beneath the table and placed a small package in front of me. It had been wrapped in brown paper and tied with plain cord. Your father instructed me to give this directly to you after the reading. I untied the cord. Inside was an old iron key, black with age and nearly as long as my palm. Beneath it lay a tide chart folded around a piece of paper. The paper carried my father's handwriting. Only one sentence had been written there. Wait for the lowest tide, then trust the dog. I read it twice. Everett stood and walked around the table. What does it say? I folded the note before he could see it. Nothing that concerns you. His jaw tightened. Everything involving Dad concerns me. Not according to the will. The room changed. It happened so quickly that even Helena drew in a breath. Everett placed both hands on the table and leaned toward me. For 25 years I kept that business alive. When Dad's knees failed, I lifted engines with him. When he could not remember invoices, I corrected them. When he fell behind on taxes, I found the money. Where were you? The truthful answer was everywhere, except where I should have been. I stood slowly. Rook rose with me. I was trying to survive. So was everybody else. He spoke those words quietly. They landed harder than if he had shouted. I could have told him about nights I woke with blood in my mouth because I had bitten through my tongue. I could have told him about driving across 3 states because stopping the truck felt more dangerous than falling asleep behind the wheel. I could have told him that I once sat outside our father's house until sunrise, unable to make myself cross the yard. But those explanations had grown old. Pain does not become easier to understand simply because it is repeated. I put the key and tide chart inside my coat. I am sorry I disappointed you. Everett looked away. For half a second, the anger left his face. In its place was something that looked almost like grief. Then it was gone. Judith handed me the deed. Helena rose and touched my arm. I flinched before I could stop myself. Her hand dropped. I can contact a land broker, she said. Someone may pay a little for the timber or shoreline rights. Dad told me to see it. He also spent his last years making strange decisions. Her voice cracked on the last word. I finally looked at her. She was not trying to hurt me. She was frightened. Our father had died without giving any of us the answers we wanted. Everett had received a business filled with debt and old machinery. Helena had received properties that required constant work. I had received a place the ocean was slowly swallowing. Perhaps our father had not rewarded any of us. Perhaps he had simply handed each child a different kind of burden. I left the office with Rook beside me. The rain had become sleet. Cars hissed across the wet street. A delivery truck dropped a metal ramp against the pavement. The crash punched through my chest. For one terrible instant, the street vanished. I smelled hot sand and burned rubber. I saw a doorway filled with white light. My hands moved before my mind did. I stepped behind a stone column and reached for a weapon that was no longer there. Rook pressed his entire body against my leg. He did not bark. He did not pull. He simply leaned. The street returned in pieces. Rain, traffic, a woman carrying groceries, the courthouse clock. I knelt and placed one hand against Rook's chest. His heartbeat was slow. Mine was not. You are getting too old to keep saving me, I whispered. Rook licked the rain from my wrist. That afternoon I studied the tide chart in the cab of my truck. The lowest tide of the month would occur the following morning, shortly after sunrise. Greyhaven Point was 2 hours away if the roads remained open. I had enough fuel to reach it. Returning might be another question. I spent $11 on canned soup, bread, dog food, and batteries. Then I drove north. Port Alder disappeared behind curtains of rain. The highway narrowed between dark forests. Houses became less frequent. Cell phone service vanished. By late afternoon, the paved road ended beside a weathered sign warning drivers about flooding and unstable ground. Beyond it, twin tracks entered the trees. The truck moved slowly over roots and washouts. Spruce branches scraped both sides like fingernails. Rook sat upright in the passenger seat, watching the forest with the concentration of a soldier returning to familiar country. 5 miles later, the trees opened. I saw Greyhaven Point for the first time in more than 30 years. The Atlantic stretched beneath a low sky the color of steel. Waves broke against black rock and climbed high enough to scatter white water across the cliffs. The property was wider than I remembered. Salt marsh filled the center, brown and silver beneath the wind. A ridge of stone rose along the northern edge. Twisted spruce trees clung to it with their roots exposed. Near the shoreline stood the remains of a wooden building, collapsed on one side and almost hidden by grass. No warm light waited in a window, no road led toward a house. No sheltered dock offered a place to tie a boat. Everett had been right. The land looked drowned. I parked near the highest ground and switched off the engine. The silence that followed was not complete. The sea struck the cliffs. Wind moved through dry grass. Somewhere in the marsh a bird gave a lonely cry. But there were no voices, no doors slamming, no engines idling outside a motel room. No footsteps above a ceiling. Rook climbed down carefully. His injured shoulder made the first few steps stiff. Then he raised his nose and faced the wind. I walked to the cliff edge. Cold spray touched my face. Far below, water moved through narrow channels between the rocks. At high tide, those channels would disappear. I took out my father's note. Wait for the lowest tide, then trust the dog. My father had known Rook. The first time I brought him home, Everett refused to let him enter the family house. Rook had been trained for war. He was scarred, restless, and suspicious of unfamiliar rooms. My father opened the kitchen door and plussed a bowl of water on the floor. He served two, he said. That ended the argument. Years later, when I vanished for weeks at a time, my father sometimes called a veterinary clinic instead of calling me. He knew I might ignore questions about myself. He knew I would always answer questions about Rook. I looked down at the note again. Trust the dog. What did he know? I asked. Rook glanced at me, then began walking toward the marsh. He explored the ground for nearly an hour. He sniffed the collapsed building, followed the edge of a tidal pool, and studied several trails left by deer. Nothing happened. The light faded, strengthened from the east. I returned to the truck and heated soup on a small camping stove behind the tailgate. Rook ate beside me. Darkness moved across the water until the sea and sky became one black surface. I expected the place to feel empty. Instead, it felt watchful, not threatening, waiting. After eating, I climbed into the truck bed and zipped myself inside the sleeping roll. Rook circled twice before lying against my back. The wind shook the canvas cover. Waves struck the cliffs with a deep, regular force. Each impact should have reminded me of explosions. For a while it did. I saw another coastline in another country. I heard a teammate named Owen Price speaking through a radio. I heard myself ordering him through a door. Then the dream changed. The sound of the sea became breathing. Rook's warmth remained against my spine. For the first time in months, I slept longer than 2 hours. I woke before sunrise. The wind had weakened. A pale gray line rested above the ocean. Rook was already standing outside the truck. He faced the southern edge of the property. The tide had retreated farther than I thought possible. Hundreds of feet of wet stone and dark sand stretched beyond the usual shoreline. Channels that had been filled the evening before now lay exposed beneath the morning sky. Rook began walking. Easy, I called. He did not slow down. I pulled on my boots, took the iron key, and followed. The ground was slick. Seaweed covered the rocks. Water dripped from ledges and collected in shallow pools filled with shells. Rook moved with growing purpose toward the base of the northern ridge. He stopped beside a wall of stone that rose directly from the beach. At first I saw nothing. Then he pawed at a strip of hanging seaweed. Behind it was a carved mark, a lantern. Time and salt had nearly erased it, but the shape was unmistakable. My father used to draw the same lantern on boxes he did not want us to open. He called it his storm mark. Rook sniffed along the wall and moved farther around the ridge. The beach narrowed. Water surrounded a group of black rocks ahead of us. I checked the tide chart. We had less than an hour before the sea began returning. Rook back. He looked at me. Then he stepped into a gap between two boulders. I followed and discovered a passage hidden behind them. It was barely wide enough for a man. The walls had been cut by tools, not water. Stone steps climbed away from the beach. Each step was slick with moss. An iron cable ran along one side, anchored into the cliff. Someone had built the path deliberately, then concealed the entrance from anyone passing along the shore. Rook climbed. His rear legs slipped once. I caught the harness around his chest and steadied him. "You are supposed to be leading me," I said. His tail moved once. The path turned inside the cliff and rose above the ocean. With every step, the sound of the waves became quieter. We passed through a tunnel no more than 20 feet long. Daylight appeared ahead. When I emerged, I found myself standing on the far side of the ridge in a hollow that could not be seen from the road or the sea. Tall grass covered the ground. A stand of apple trees leaned toward the morning light. Beyond them stood a long building made of stone and cedar. It was not a house. A square tower rose from one end. The glass at the top had broken long ago, but the iron frame remained. A rusted bell hung beneath the roof. Faded letters had been carved above the main entrance. Greyhaven Life-Saving Station. I knew enough local history to understand what I was seeing. Before radios became common, life-saving crews lived along dangerous sections of the coast. When ships struck reefs or broke apart during storms, those men entered the water in wooden boats and pulled strangers from the sea. Most of the stations had been abandoned or destroyed. No map I had ever seen showed one at Greyhaven Point. Rook walked to the entrance. The door was built from thick oak reinforced with iron bands. At its center was a black keyhole. My hand went into my coat. The key Judith had given me was cold against my palm. Before using it, I noticed something beneath the salt stains covering the door. Words had been burned into the wood. I wiped the surface with my sleeve. The message appeared slowly. It was written in my father's hand. For those who returned from the war, but could not find their way home. My fingers stopped moving. The sea sounded distant behind the ridge. Rook sat beside me and stared at the locked door. My father had owned this land for more than 30 years. He had told no one about the station. He had left no road leading to it. He had hidden the entrance behind a path that vanished beneath the tide. And somehow, long before his death, he had written a message for men like me. I placed the iron key into the lock. It turned with a heavy click. From somewhere inside the station came another sound. A slow metallic movement. Then the old Renaissance bell in the tower rang once. The bell rang only once. Its voice rolled through the tower deep and hollow, then faded into the hidden valley behind the ridge. Rook rose immediately. The fur along his shoulders lifted. He placed himself between me and the open doorway, his body rigid despite the stiffness in his injured leg. I kept one hand on the iron key and listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement, except the soft knocking of a loose window frame somewhere inside the building. The bell had probably been connected to the lock by an old cable. Turning the key must have released a weight inside the tower. That was the reasonable explanation. After years of seeing ordinary objects become weapons, I had learned to search for reasonable explanations first. They did not always calm me, but they gave my mind something solid to stand on. I pushed the door wider. Cold air moved from the darkness. It carried the smell of cedar rust, wet stone, lamp oil, and something faintly sweet that reminded me of dried apples. Morning light entered behind us, revealing a wide central room. Long wooden benches lined the walls. Hooks for coats and rescue equipment hung from heavy beams. A narrow boat rested upside down on a cradle near the far end. Its white paint had yellowed, and one side carried a repaired crack, but the hull remained intact. Ropes were coiled on shelves. Lanterns stood in rows. A large iron stove occupied the center of the room, its pipe rising through the ceiling. Everything had been cleaned. Dust lay across the floor, but not enough for a building abandoned over generations. Someone had cared for this place. Someone had returned again and again. Rook entered slowly. He sniffed each bench, then moved toward a doorway beside the stove. I followed. The next room held 6 narrow beds, each covered with a folded wool blanket. A trunk rested at the foot of every frame. Names had been carved into the wood above them. Some were Ola's Dunn, Matthew Crowley, Silas Bell, Jonah Pike. Others were newer. The newer names had not been carved with the same steady hand. They had been cut by people who were tired, angry, or shaking. Peter Shaw, Daniel Russo to Michael Vansbos. I stopped breathing. Owen Price. I read the name again. Rook moved beside me and pressed his shoulder against my knee. Owen had served with me. He was 38 years old when he died. He came from Ohio, spoke too loudly, drank terrible coffee, and carried photographs of his twin daughters inside a plastic bag to keep them dry. During our final operation together, I ordered him through a side entrance because intelligence suggested the main hallway had been trapped. The side entrance was trapped instead. The explosion killed him before he hit the floor. I had watched the helmet camera footage dozens of times during the investigation. Every time, I searched for the decision that would have saved him. A pause, a shadow, a wire, a change in the dust, something I should have noticed. The review board cleared me. My team cleared me. Owen's wife wrote that he had trusted my judgment. None of it mattered. The dead do not return, because paperwork says no one was responsible. I reached toward the carved name, but stopped before touching it. "How did you get here?" I whispered. Rooks sniffed the bed beneath Owen's name. Then he walked toward a cabinet against the wall. The cabinet door stood partly open. Inside were folded shirts, work pants, rain jackets, boots, and several cardboard boxes marked by size. None of the clothing was new, but it was clean and carefully stored. A small notebook rested on the upper shelf. I opened it. The first page carried my father's handwriting, Greyhaven Clothing Inventory. Below the title, he had listed every coat, shirt, blanket, boot, and pair of gloves in the room. Each item had been checked and dated. The most recent date was only 3 months before his death. I turned the page. Names appeared with short notes. Peter Shaw stayed 11 weeks, slept poorly during storms. Repaired western roof, left for carpentry position in Bangor. Daniel Russo stayed 5 months, helped rebuild water system. Returned to wife and son after counseling. Michael Vance stayed 6 days, food, accepted coffee, left without saying goodbye. Called later from Vermont. Then I found Owen Price. Arrived in late October, stayed 8 days, spoke often about Caleb, carried guilt that did not belong to him, left letter in lower desk. Requested it remain sealed until Caleb came home. The room tilted. I put one hand against the cabinet. Owen had been here. Not before he died, that was impossible. Then I saw the date written beside his name. It was from 6 years before our final deployment. Owen had visited Greyhaven while we were both still serving. He had come here and spoken about me to my father. I remembered that year. Our team returned to stateside after a long deployment. Owen disappeared for more than a week and told us later that he had gone fishing in Maine. I mocked him because he returned without a single photograph of a fish. He only smiled and said the trip had been about finding quiet water. At the time, I thought he was avoiding questions. Now I understood. My father had brought him here. I left the sleeping room and searched for the desk mentioned in the notebook. The next doorway opened into what had once been the station keeper's office. Charts covered the walls. A large table stood beneath the windows, crowded with tide books, handwritten ledgers, and maps of the coast. Colored pins marked locations from New Hampshire to northern Maine. Several shelves held medical supplies, emergency food, batteries, radios, and water filters. The equipment was not antique. Much of it was less than 10 years old. An old desk stood beneath the tower stairs. Its lower drawer was locked. The iron key from my father did not fit. I searched beneath the desk, along the frame and behind the drawers. Nothing. Rook sniffed the floor, then placed one paw on a small brass plate near the baseboard. The plate carried the same lantern symbol carved into the cliff. I pressed it. A narrow compartment opened beneath the desk. Inside lay a smaller key attached to a strip of faded blue cloth. I recognized the cloth. It came from one of my father's work shirts. He wore blue chambray almost every day of his life. The small key opened the lower drawer. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Each bore a name. Some had been opened and resealed. Others remained untouched. The first envelope in the row carried my name. The second carried Owen's. My hands began to shake. I took Owen's letter but did not open it, not yet. There was too much I did not understand. Behind the envelopes rested another journal. Unlike the inventory book, this one had been bound in dark leather. The first page read, Greyhaven Project, Private. For Caleb, when he is ready to learn why this place exists. I carried the journal to the table. Rook settled beneath the nearest window, though his eyes remained on the open door. My father's first entry had been written nearly 28 years earlier. He described finding the life-saving station while surveying the property after purchasing it from a bankrupt shipping company. The company believed the old building had collapsed. The hidden trail had vanished from public records after a landslide covered the original road. My father discovered the tidal entrance while following an injured fox along the beach. He spent 2 summers clearing the passage and repairing the roof. At first, he intended to turn the station into a fishing lodge. Then a former Marine named Samuel Green entered Ward Marine Supply during a winter storm. Samuel Green had no money. He wore summer shoes in January. He asked my father whether he could sleep inside an abandoned boat in the equipment yard. My father refused. Instead, he brought the man to Greyhaven. Samuel stayed for 3 months. He repaired the stove, replaced broken windows, and rebuilt part of the stone foundation. He rarely spoke about the war. He did not need to. My father had served in the Navy during Vietnam. He never talked about his service with us. I knew he had worked aboard a coastal patrol vessel. I knew a photograph of 5 young sailors remained hidden in his toolbox. I knew he sometimes stood in the backyard during thunderstorms instead of taking shelter. That was all. In the journal he wrote more. He described bringing wounded men from damaged boats under enemy fire. He wrote about a sailor named Thomas Keene, whose hands slipped from my father's arms during a night rescue. My father carried the memory for 40 years. He never told my mother. He never told his children. He told Samuel Green. One veteran recognized the silence inside another. When Samuel became strong enough to leave Greyhaven, he found work on a lobster boat and later opened a repair shop near Augusta. Before leaving, he carved his name above one of the beds. After him came others. Some stayed one night. Some stayed through entire winters. A few were brought by family members. Others came through veterans groups, hospitals, police officers, fishermen, or old military friends. No money changed hands. My father asked only 3 things. Keep the station hidden, repair something before leaving, and help the next man who arrives. I read those words several times. Help the next man who arrives. The entries continued year after year. The station became a quiet refuge for veterans who had slipped through every visible crack. Men who could not tolerate shelters, men who refused hospitals, men who trusted workings more than careful questions. Switched. My father gave them food, tools, dry clothing, and distance. He did not force them to speak. He worked beside them. Together they repaired the tower, cleared the orchard, strengthened the seawall, dug a well, and installed a gravity-fed water tank high on the ridge. Some returned home, some found jobs, some disappeared. 2 died elsewhere and had their ashes scattered from the cliffs. My father recorded every name. He remembered everyone. Then the entries reached the year I brought Rook home. My father wrote that the dog entered the station without hesitation. Rook was still young then. He searched every room, climbed the tower, and slept beneath the rescue bell. My father believed animals understood the purpose of a place faster than people did. Several pages later, he wrote about me. Caleb came to Greyhaven today but never knew it. He slept in the truck beyond the northern ridge after driving through the night. I watched from the trees. He was thinner than he should be. The dog remained awake beside him. I remembered that night. I had come to Maine after leaving a temporary security job in Boston. I drove toward my father's house but stopped miles away. The road near Greyhaven offered enough darkness to hide. I slept in the truck, woke before dawn, and left. My father had seen me. He could have approached. He could have knocked on the window. He chose not to. His entry explained why. He wrote that I startled awake with my hand beneath the seat. He feared that waking me suddenly would place both of us in danger. So he left a thermos of coffee near the rear tire and watched until I found it. I had believed the coffee belonged to a hunter. I drank it while driving south. That small kindness had followed me for years without a name. Now it had one. I closed the journal. Outside, sunlight had reached the apple trees. The hidden valley no longer felt abandoned. It felt crowded with people I could not see. Men had slept in those beds. They had stood at the windows during storm. They had repaired walls when they could not repair themselves. They had carved their names because they needed proof that they had existed somewhere without being judged. And Owen had been one of them. I picked up his envelope. The paper had yellowed at the edges. My name was written across the front in his large, uneven handwriting. I broke the seal. Caleb, your old man told me he will keep this until you are ready, which probably means you will read it when both of us are too stubborn or too dead to explain ourselves. That sounds like us. I almost laughed. It came out as a broken breath. I continued. I came here because I was not sleeping. You noticed. I know you noticed. You covered for me twice and changed the watch schedule so I could rest without making it obvious. I never thanked you. Your father brought me to Greyhaven after I called him looking for you. I do not know why I called him instead of you. Maybe I knew you would try to fix me. Maybe I needed someone who would let me stay broken for a few days. This place helped. Your father helped more. He said you carry every man under your command as though losing one would erase every person you saved. He said that is not leadership. That is punishment. I stopped reading. The words struck too close. Rook lifted his head. I forced myself to continue. One day, one of us may not come back. That is the truth of what we do. When that day comes, do not build a prison out of the decision that put him in danger. Every man on the team chooses the door with you. We know you cannot see through walls. We follow because you have brought us home more times than we can count. I am writing this before the next deployment because there are things men never say when the plane is waiting. You are my brother. Nothing that happens later can change that. If I die before you, remember that I chose the life, the mission, and the men beside me. Do not make my final choice into your lifelong sentence. I lowered the letter. For years I had imagined what Owen might say if the dead could speak. In my worst nights he accused me. In others he asked why I had sent him through that door. Sometimes he said nothing. He only looked at me with the expression he wore during the final seconds of the helmet footage. But Owen had spoken. He had written the words years before his death and left them in a hidden station on the Maine coast. My father had preserved them. He had waited for me. Neither man could have known exactly what would happen. Yet both had understood the shape of the wound before it arrived. I pressed the letter against my forehead. Something inside me gave way. I had cried when Owen died. I had cried during the investigation. I had cried alone inside motel bathrooms where running water covered the sound. This was different. There was no rage in it, no panic, only grief that had finally found somewhere to go. Rook came to me. I slid from the chair and sat on the floor. He placed his head against my chest. I held him for a long time. The old station settled around us. Wood moved in the warming air. Water dripped from the roof into a metal bucket. The rescue bell remained silent above the tower. When I could breathe normally again, I returned to the journal. The final entries were less steady. My father's handwriting had grown smaller. He wrote about pain in his left arm, shortness of breath, dizziness while climbing the tower. He knew his heart was failing. He refused surgery because the doctor could not promise he would wake without losing his independence. That sounded like him. He had begun preparing Greyhaven for me. He repaired the tidal entrance. He stocked food. He prepaid the property taxes. He asked Judith to create legal protections around the shoreline. But there was one problem. A company called North Star Coastal Development had been purchasing land nearby. North Star wanted to build a private retreat with luxury cabins, a marina, and a road across the marsh. They believed Greyhaven Point was essential because it controlled access to the only deep section of the bay. My father rejected 3 offers. The final offer came with a warning. If he refused to sell, North Star would challenge the old shoreline boundaries and argue that the hidden station stood on public land. My father believed they would fail, but legal fights required money. The business was already struggling. Everett knew about North Star's interest in the coastline, though he did not know about the station. That explained his reaction to the will. He had not laughed merely because the land appeared worthless. He knew someone wanted it. He might not have known how badly. The final journal entry had been written 5 days before my father's death. Caleb will believe I left him a burden, perhaps I did. Greyhaven is not an easy gift. The sea attacks it. The law may threaten it. His brother may misunderstand it. The men who need it may never know how to ask for it. But I cannot leave the station to someone who sees only property. Caleb understands rescue. He has spent his life entering dark places for strangers. What he has never understood is that he is also allowed to be rescued. I closed the journal. My father had not given me land. He had given me a responsibility. The thought frightened me more than the empty coastline. A man without an address had been placed in charge of a refuge. A man who could not repair his own life had inherited a place built to repair others. I stood and walked through the station again. This time I noticed what the first shock had hidden. The roof leaked near the tower. Several foundation stones had shifted. The food supplies were organized but limited. The well pump needed repair. Mold darkened one corner of the sleeping room. The western windows would not survive another major storm. Greyhaven was not waiting for a caretaker someday. It needed one now. Rook stopped beside the station's rear door. A faint growl rose in his chest. I moved toward the window. From the hidden valley I could see the upper ridge. A man stood between the spruce trees. He wore a dark rain jacket and held something near his face. Binoculars. When he realized I had seen him, he turned and disappeared into the forest. I ran outside. Rook followed. By the time we reached the trees, the man was gone. The ground beneath the spruce held fresh boot prints. They led uphill toward the outer road. A vehicle engine started beyond the ridge. I reached the overlook in time to see a black sport utility vehicle moving between the trees. There was no license plate on the rear. Rook sniffed the tracks, then looked toward the retreating engine. Someone had been watching the station. Someone knew the hidden valley existed. We returned to the building. I searched each room more carefully. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then I noticed the drawer beneath the desk. The envelopes had shifted. I had left Owen's letter on top of the journal. Now another envelope rested beside it. The name on the front was Everett Ward. I had not placed it there. I opened the drawer fully. Everett's envelope was gone from the row. The envelope on the desk was empty. Someone had entered before us. Someone had taken my father's letter to my brother. I heard a sound outside, not the bell, an engine. This one was closer. I moved to the front window and saw Everett's truck appear beyond the apple trees. He drove into the hidden valley, as though he had known the road his entire life. That was impossible. The only entrance I knew was beneath the cliffs. Then I saw a narrow path behind him, descending from the forest on the western ridge. The road had been concealed by fallen branches and brush. Everett stopped in front of the station. He climbed out before the engine died. His face was red from anger. He held a folded letter in one hand, the letter that had been missing from the drawer. Helena stepped out from the passenger side. She looked frightened. Everett marched toward me. "You had no right to come here alone." I glanced at the letter. "Where did you get that?" "Dad sent it to me 6 months ago. The lie came too quickly." Helena looked away. Everett saw that I noticed. His expression hardened. "I found it here after the funeral. So you knew about the station." "I knew enough." "You knew before the will was read." He did not answer. Everything inside me tightened. The laughter in the attorney's office. The questions about division. The concern over the land. Everett had known Greyhaven was more than flooded rock. He had allowed me to believe our father had humiliated me. "Why did you say nothing?" "Because this place should never have been left to you." Rook stepped between us. Everett stopped. He had known Rook for years, but he understood the warning in the dog's posture. Helena moved closer. "Caleb, please listen before this becomes worse." "Worse than what?" Everett held up the letter. "Dad promised this property to me." "Then why is my name on the deed?" "Because he changed his mind after he got sick." "Maybe he changed his mind because he knew what you planned to do." Everett's face became still. I had seen that stillness before. It was the moment before our father lost his temper. Everett opened the letter and read from it. "Greyhaven cannot survive without money, equipment, and legal protection. Everett understands business. Caleb understands the men. I hoped my sons might one day protect the station together." He lowered the paper. "That was Dad's plan." "What happened to the rest of the letter?" "There is no rest." I held out my hand. Everett hesitated before giving it to me. The lower edge had been torn away. Only half the letter remained. "You destroyed it." I removed words written by a sick man who did not understand what he was asking. "What did they say?" Everett looked toward the tower. Helena answered for him. "They said Everett was never to control the property." He turned toward her. "You promised to stay out of this." "I promised to stop you from making another mistake." Everett's hands curled into fists. For the first time, I understood that my brother was not merely angry. He was desperate. "How much do you owe?" I asked. He stared at me. "Ward Marine is failing, isn't it? That business employs 14 families." "How much?" "Northstar offered enough to save everything Dad built. At the price of destroying this, at the price of using land." I pointed toward the station. "This place saved men. And the marina feeds children." His voice broke across the valley. Birds rose from the apple trees. I could not dismiss that truth. 14 families depended on the business. Everett had carried the company. while I drifted from one temporary job to another. If Ward Marine failed, his pain would not remain his alone. But Northstar did not want to preserve Greyhaven. They wanted the deep bay, the shoreline, and a road through protected land. The station would become a problem to remove. Everett saw my uncertainty. He stepped closer. Northstar's offer expires in 9 days. Sign the property over to the family trust. We sell the development rights. You will receive enough money to find a place and get treatment. The station can be photographed, documented, maybe moved. You cannot move what happened here. You have been here one morning, and you have known for months. I was trying to protect Dad's legacy. No, you were deciding which part of it was worth money. Everett looked as though I had struck him. Helena closed her eyes. Rook remained between us. The bell above the tower moved in the wind. A soft metallic groan passed through the station. Everett placed the torn letter inside his coat. Northstar already filed a boundary challenge. When? Yesterday. My stomach tightened. They waited until after the will. They believe the tidal path and Western Ridge belong to the county. If the court agrees, this station has no legal access. You will own a building you cannot reach. The old road crosses our property. Part of it crosses Northstar's The Man in the Trees, the black vehicle. Northstar had already begun watching. Everett continued. They will send surveyors tomorrow morning. After that, lawyers. You do not have the money to fight them. Then why are you here? To give you one chance to make the sensible decision. No, you have not heard the terms. I heard enough. Everett's face darkened. You are choosing dead strangers over your own family. I stepped close enough to see the exhaustion beneath his anger. No, Dad made the choice. I am trying to understand it. He was not thinking clearly. He spent nearly 30 years thinking about this place. And 6 years forgetting where he put invoices. Helena flinched. Everett regretted the words immediately. Our father's memory had begun failing near the end. Not completely. Small things disappeared, names, dates. Tools left in unusual places. Everett had covered for him. He had carried the fear alone. I understood why he doubted every final decision. But the journals were not confused. The station was not an accident. Owen's letter was not a symptom of illness. I looked at my brother. I will not sign anything today. You have 9 days. I have as long as the deed says I have. Everett walked back to the truck. Before opening the door, he turned. When the surveyors arrive, do not threaten them. Do not touch them. Do not give Northstar a reason to call you unstable. The word hung between us. Unstable. Not brethren. Not caretaker. A legal weakness. Something a company could use. Helena remained after Everett entered the truck. She spoke quietly. There is another reason he wants the sale. I know. The business. Not only the business. She looked toward him to make sure he could not hear. Dad borrowed against the marina to maintain Greyhaven. Everett discovered it after the funeral. If Northstar wins the boundary case, the bank may call the loan. How much? She told me. The number was larger than I could comprehend. Our father had risked the family business to preserve the station. Everett was not only trying to gain something, he was trying to stop everything else from collapsing. Helena touched my sleeve but avoided my arm this time. Find out what Dad intended before you decide. Find all of it. Everett destroyed part of that letter because it mentioned a second deed. What second deed? He would not tell me. She returned to the truck. They drove away along the hidden road. I watched until the trees swallowed them. Rook sat beside me. The tide had risen beyond the cliff entrance. For several hours, the road through Northstar's land was our only way out. I returned to the station and opened my father's journal. A second deed. I searched the desk, cabinets, trunks, and shelves. Nothing. Then Rook walked to the base of the tower stairs. He stared upward. The steps were narrow and steep. At the top, the old lantern room stood beneath cracked glass. The rescue bell hung from a black iron frame. A thick rope descended through the floor. I climbed slowly. Rook remained below. The tower room contained almost nothing. An empty lamp housing, a rusted chair, a brass speaking tube, a circular view of Greyhaven, the marsh, and the sea. I checked the walls and floor. No hidden drawer, no papers. Then I remembered the bell ringing when the door opened. I examined the iron frame. One bolt looked newer than the others. Behind it was the lantern symbol. I pressed the mark. The base of the bell shifted. Inside the hollow frame rested a sealed metal cylinder. I pulled it free. Before I could open it, Rook barked below. Once, then again, not an alert, a warning. I looked through the broken tower glass. 3 white trucks had entered Greyhaven from the western road. Each carried the blue compass symbol of North Star Coastal Development. Men in hard hats climbed out near the apple trees. One unrolled a survey map across the hood, another carried metal stakes. A third man pointed directly toward the station. Then a woman stepped from the lead vehicle. She wore a long gray coat and held a red folder beneath one arm. Even from the tower I recognized her. Her name was Vanessa Hale. She had represented the government during the investigation into Owen's death. She was the attorney who questioned every decision I made on our final mission. Now she was standing on my father's land, and she was looking up at me as though she had known exactly where I would be. Vanessa Hale stood beneath the broken tower windows, with one hand resting on the red folder. For a moment, neither of us moved. The last time I had seen her, she sat beneath bright lights in a windowless government room. A recorder had rested between us. Photographs from the operation were arranged across the table. She had asked me why I chose the eastern entrance, why I divided the team, why I sent Owen ahead. Her voice had remained calm through every answer. That calmness followed me home. In my nightmares, gunfire eventually faded. Vanessa's questions did not. Now she raised one hand toward the tower. Commander Ward, I would prefer to speak before this becomes unnecessarily difficult. I hated the title. I had not been a commander in years. The words still carried the weight of men who once expected me to know where danger waited. I placed the metal cylinder inside my coat and descended the stairs. Rook waited near the bottom. His attention remained fixed on the open door. Stay close, I told him. We stepped outside. 3 surveyors were spreading equipment across the grass. One drove a metal stake near the apple trees. Another positioned a tripod beside the station. The sharp hammering echoed against the ridge. My chest tightened with each strike. Rook looked back at me. I placed my palm against his shoulder and forced myself to study the scene as it existed, not as my memory tried to remake it. Wet grass, white trucks, orange vests, no rifles, no smoke. No wounded men. Vanessa walked toward me. Time had changed her. Silver now ran through her dark hair. Fine lines framed her mouth, and exhaustion had settled beneath her eyes. Yet her posture remained exact, as though every part of her had been trained never to reveal uncertainty. You work for North Star, I said. I represent them in a limited property matter. You came onto private land without permission. The ownership of this section is disputed. The deed says otherwise. Your deed relies on boundaries drawn before the Western Road was constructed. North Star acquired the adjoining tract and discovered conflicting surveys. So they brought the woman who helped investigate me. Her expression shifted slightly. I was not assigned because of you. You knew my name was on the property. I learned that yesterday. And you still came. Yes, at least she did not lie. I looked toward the surveyors. Tell them to stop driving stakes. They are marking temporary reference points. They are damaging the orchard. They are following the court authorization. Show me. Vanessa opened the red folder and removed several pages. The document allowed North Star to inspect the contested boundary. It did not allow excavation, removal of structures, or interference with the owner's use. I read every line. Military operations had taught me that danger often hid inside words written by men who never entered the field. The authorization was temporary. The judge had not decided who owned the road or ridge. North Star was trying to create facts before the hearing. I handed the papers back. Your surveyors can measure the western boundary. They do not touch the station, the orchard, or anything east of the stone marker beside the trees. Vanessa looked at the surveyor, holding the hammer. Mr. Cole, move the reference stake 20 feet west. The man frowned. Our map puts the line here. The court order does not. He pulled the stake from the ground. I had expected Vanessa to argue. Her quick agreement unsettled me more. You are not here only for a survey, I said. No. What do you want? To see the station? No. Your father referenced it in several financial documents. My father's financial documents belong to his estate. North Star believes company funds from Ward Marine Supply were used to improve a structure located partly on North Star land. That is a convenient belief. It is supported by invoices. Everett gave them to you. I cannot discuss my client's sources. That answered the question. My brother had provided Northstar with records from the marina. He had not only considered selling Greyhaven, he had already helped the company build a claim against it. Rook moved closer to Vanessa and sniffed the bottom of her coat. She froze. He will not hurt you unless you give him a reason. That is not especially comforting. He was never trained to be comforting. Rook continued smelling her coat, then looked toward the lead vehicle. His ears lifted. Vanessa noticed there was no one inside. Rook walked toward the vehicle anyway. I followed. The rear windows were darkened. A faint sound came from behind the glass. Scratching, then a low whine. Rook stood on his rear legs and placed his front paws against the door. Vanessa turned sharply toward one of the surveyors. What is in this vehicle? The man with the hammer looked away. Equipment, Rook barked. The sound struck the valley like a gunshot. I opened the rear door. A young German shepherd lay inside a wire crate. The dog could not have been more than 2 years old. Her coat was wet. A nylon muzzle had been pulled too tightly around her snout, and blood marked one side where she had rubbed against it. No water bowl had been placed in the crate. Her breathing was fast. Her eyes moved between every person outside the vehicle. What is this? Vanessa demanded. The surveyor approached. She is a detection dog. For what? Environmental inspection. I looked at the dog's ribs. She was too thin for active work. Her paws were raw. That animal has not been trained for environmental inspection. The man's face hardened. You a veterinarian? No. Then leave company equipment alone. Rook stepped between us. A growl formed deep in his chest. The man moved his hand toward a metal tool on his belt. I saw the motion. Everything inside me became cold. You do not want to do that, I said. He stopped. Vanessa looked from the injured dog to the surveyor. Who authorized bringing her? Mr. Sloan. Victor Sloan is not managing this inspection. He said the dog could locate old fuel tanks. Then why is she muzzled inside a locked truck? The man did not answer. I reached into the crate slowly. The young shepherd pulled away. Rook lowered himself beside the open door. He did not look directly at her. He turned his head slightly and waited. The younger dog watched him. Her breathing slowed. I unfastened the muzzle. She drank from the bottle cap I held beneath her mouth, then licked every drop from the plastic. I looked at Vanessa. This is not a survey crew. Her face had gone pale with anger. She turned toward the man. Remove your people from the property. You cannot do that. I represent Northstar in this matter. Mr. Sloan gave us instructions. My instructions now are to leave. The other surveyors began gathering their equipment. The man remained still. This is going to cost you. Vanessa stepped closer. Put that sentence in writing. He looked at her for several seconds, then walked toward the second truck. The vehicles turned around one by one. The lead vehicle remained. The injured dog was still inside. Vanessa took the keys from the ignition. They left her. They expected her to do something. Find buried tanks? Maybe. Rooks sniffed the crate, then turned toward the station. The young dog watched him. What happens to her? I asked. I will contact animal control. They will take hours to reach this place. I cannot drive her while she is frightened. I can. Vanessa studied me. You barely know me. I know. The dog needs water. That was not what I meant. I opened the crate. The shepherd refused to move. Rook walked several feet away and looked back. The younger dog stretched one paw beyond the crate, then another. She stepped onto the grass. Her legs trembled. Rook led her toward the station. I had seen him guide frightened soldiers through smoke with less patience than he showed that young dog. Vanessa watched them disappear through the doorway. I did not know Northstar would bring an animal, she said. You work for men who hide a starving dog inside a vehicle. You may want to learn what else they do without telling you. I already have concerns. Then why are you here? She looked toward the sea. Because I believed the boundary claim might be legitimate. And now? Now I believe someone is trying to reach this property before the hearing. I touched the cylinder beneath my coat. Why? That is what I came to ask you. Inside the station, the young shepherd drank nearly an entire bowl of water. Rook stood beside her while she ate small pieces of bread from my hand. There was no tag on her collar, no name, only a number written in black marker beneath the leather. Vanessa photographed the injuries. Then she called the county sheriff and a humane officer. Neither could arrive before late afternoon. She stayed near the door as though she had not decided whether she was welcome. I placed the metal cylinder on the desk. Her eyes moved toward it. What is that? Something I found before you arrived. May I see it? No, that answer is becoming familiar. It has served me well. The cylinder had been sealed with a threaded cap. Salt and age had locked it in place. I wrapped it with cloth and used a wrench from the station workshop. The cap resisted. Then it opened with a crack. Inside were several documents wrapped in waxed canvas. The first was a deed, not the one Judith had given me. This deed was much older. It had been signed nearly a century before my birth. The United States government had transferred the Greyhaven Life-Saving Station and its surrounding land to a trust created by six local families. The property was to remain available for maritime rescue, public safety, or charitable refuge. If the trust failed, ownership did not pass to neighboring landholders. It transferred to the state of Maine for continued protective use. Vanessa read over my shoulder. This changes the boundary case. It ends it, not necessarily. The station cannot belong to North Star. The company may argue the trust dissolved. I unfolded the next document. It was signed by my father, Samuel Green, and several other men whose names appeared above the beds. They had reactivated the trust 14 years earlier. Each man served as a trustee. My father was the final surviving trustee. A handwritten amendment named his youngest son, Caleb Ward, as successor. Me. The responsibility had not passed through the will alone. The old trust had appointed me before my father died. North Star could challenge my private deed. They could not easily erase a charitable trust with federal origins and continuous records. Vanessa took a slow breath. Victor Lone cannot know this exists. Someone knew enough to send people here. The final paper in the cylinder was a list of coordinates and names. Some names belonged to men recorded in my father's journal. Others were unfamiliar. Beside each name was a date and a number. At the bottom, my father had written, "The station was built by rescuers. It must never depend on one family again. Find the Bellstones." Rook began pacing near the desk. The young shepherd followed him. He stopped beneath the speaking tube that ran down from the tower. A faint clicking came through the brass opening. Wind moved the bell rope above us. 3 clicks. A pause. 2 clicks. Another pause. 3. I looked at the coordinates. The first numbers ended with the same pattern. 3, 2, 3. The Bellstones, Vanessa said. Could those be boundary markers? Maybe. I spread my father's maps across the table. Small lantern symbols appeared at several locations along the coast. One stood near the hidden tidal entrance. Another marked the orchard. A third had been drawn beside an inlet north of the station. The remaining symbols continued across properties my father had never owned. Some were on islands, some stood near old fishing villages. The coordinates matched the lantern marks. My father had created a network. Greyhaven was only the center. Each location might contain records, supplies, money, or evidence belonging to the trust. The list included 12 names, 12 trustees, donors, or witnesses. If even one remained alive, North Star's argument that the trust had dissolved would become much harder to prove. Vanessa pointed to the 7th name, Martin Hale. I looked at her family, my father. The room became quiet. Vanessa stared at the date beside his name. I did not know he had ever been here. What branch? Army. 2 tours in Vietnam. Did he talk about the war? Never. Then he would have fit in. She ignored the comment. My father disappeared for several weeks when I was 11. My mother said he had gone north for work. When he returned, he stopped drinking. Her fingers moved toward the paper, but did not touch it. He carried a small stone, marked with a lantern for the rest of his life. A bellstone, where is it now? In my house. I studied her face. The attorney who had questioned me after Owen's death had grown up with one of Greyhaven's secrets beside her father's bed. Neither of us had known. That did not make her a friend. But it made her part of the story. What did your father tell you about the stone? Only that it came from a place where no one asked him to explain himself. My father's rules: keep the station hidden, repair something before leaving, help the next man who arrives. Vanessa looked toward the sleeping room. Which bed was his? We can find out. The journal listed Martin Hale as arriving during the first winter after Samuel Green. He stayed 6 months. He repaired the tower bell and carved the first lantern marks into stone. Before leaving, he established a small emergency fund for veterans traveling north. That fund became the trust's first money. Vanessa read the entry silently. Her face remained controlled until she reached the final line. Martin says the bell should ring for the living, not the dead. She sat down. My father said that. When? The night my brother died. I waited. He was 17. A driver crossed the center line during a snowstorm. My mother wanted a memorial service with bells from the church. My father refused. He said bells should call people home, not tell them it was too late. Her voice had changed. The careful government attorney was gone. For a moment, she was a daughter discovering that her father's private language had begun in this room. Rook entered from the sleeping quarters. The Frenchard stayed close to his side. She no longer trembled. Vanessa wiped her eyes before either dog reached us. I questioned you for 9 days, she said. I remember. I believed you withheld information. I did. Her head lifted. I had never admitted that outside a classified room. I changed one detail in my final statement. What detail? Owen volunteered for the eastern entrance. Vanessa became still. I reported that I assigned him. Why? Because he had a wife and daughters. If the report described him as volunteering against my original plan, his family might believe he caused his own death. That would not have affected his benefits. I did not know that at the time. You accepted responsibility to protect his reputation. I accepted responsibility because I was alive. Vanessa looked at Owen's opened letter. Did he write that? I handed it to her. She read slowly. When she finished, she returned it without speaking. You were never under criminal investigation, she said. It felt like one. We were examining an intelligence failure. I pushed because someone changed the entry plan less than an hour before your team arrived. What? She opened the red folder and removed a thin page that did not belong with the property documents. I brought this because your name appeared in the Greyhaven file. It was a copy of a communication log from the final mission. A civilian contractor had transmitted updated building plans to our operations center. The plans marked the western hallway as unstable. The eastern entrance was labeled clear. Those labels influenced my decision. I had never seen the contractor's name. The investigation report I received called the source confidential. Vanessa pointed to the authorization code. The code belonged to Halcyon Strategic Services. I knew the company. Halcyon provided security and logistics for private developments overseas. Northstar Coastal Development was one of its domestic subsidiaries. I looked at Vanessa. You are telling me the company trying to take Greyhaven supplied the plans that sent Owen through that door. I am telling you the corporate chain leads to the same parent organization. Why did no one tell me? The contractor claimed the plans came from a local source. The original records disappeared before we could verify them. Disappeared? Deleted during a server transfer. Cold moved through me. For years I had believed the failure belonged to me. Now a company connected to Northstar stood between my father's station and the sea. That did not prove anyone had intentionally killed Owen. It did prove that the same organization had hidden mistakes before. Vanessa watched my hands. They had begun to shake. This may be coincidence, she said. No, you cannot decide that without evidence. Men like Victor Sloan survive by calling patterns coincidences. I know. Her answer surprised me. What happened? I represented another Northstar project 2 years ago. A historic fishing cooperative refused to sell its dock. After several safety inspections, the building was condemned. A fire destroyed it before the appeal. Was the fire investigated? Yes, and no cause determined. We both looked toward the station's wooden beams. Northstar had sent men onto the property with a dog they claimed could detect old fuel tanks. If the dog found something dangerous, inspectors could condemn the station. If she failed, the men might create what they needed her to find. The young shepherd walked toward the rear wall. She sniffed beneath a shelf, then scratched the floor. Rook joined her. I removed the boards covering the corner. A chemical smell rose from the soil beneath them. Vanessa knelt beside me. That is fuel. The earth was wet, fresh. Someone had poured diesel beneath the station. The young dog had been brought to alert on it. Northstar could claim the building contaminated protected marshland. If the fuel reached the water, state officials might order the entire station removed. I followed the damp soil toward the outer wall. A small hole had been drilled through the cedar siding. Someone had poured the fuel from outside. The surveyors had not arrived to measure land. They had arrived to manufacture evidence. Vanessa photographed everything. Do not touch more than necessary. You believe me now? I believe someone committed a crime, say the company. I will say it when I can prove who ordered it. The sound of an engine reached the valley. The county humane officer arrived with a sheriff's deputy. The deputy was a heavy man named Aaron Pike. His family name appeared above one of the oldest beds. When he entered the station, he removed his hat. My grandfather told me this place fell into the sea. It almost did, I said. He examined the drilled hole, the wet fuel, and the photographs. The humane officer treated the young shepherd's paws and scanned her for identification. The chip listed a private kennel in Pennsylvania. The kennel had reported her dead 6 months earlier. Her registered name was Liberty. The humane officer wanted to take her to a county facility. Liberty pressed herself against Rook and refused to enter the transport crate. Rook looked at me. I knew that look. He had made a decision. I will keep her until the case is resolved, I said. The officer hesitated. You have experience with working dogs. Enough. Aaron Pike looked at Rook's scars. He is more than enough. The officer completed a temporary foster form. Liberty remained at Greyhaven. By late afternoon, Vanessa had sent copies of the trust documents and photographs to the state attorney general's office. She also withdrew as North Star's counsel. Victor Sloan called before she finished the notice. I could hear his voice through the phone, even from across the room. He accused her of violating client confidentiality. He threatened her license. He told her she had no idea what she was interfering with. Vanessa listened without interrupting. Then she said, I know exactly what I am interfering with. She ended the call. The sun dropped behind the ridge. Aaron and the humane officer left by the western road. Vanessa's vehicle remained because the survey crew had taken the other keys. She would have to drive it out alone. Before leaving, she placed her father's address beside the list of bellstones. I will bring his lantern stone tomorrow. You believe it matters? My father believed it mattered. She looked toward the tower. North Star will move quickly now, so will we. There is no we yet. You resigned because of what you found here. I resigned because my client may have committed fraud. You came carrying records from Owen's investigation. That was personal. So is this, she almost smiled. Keep the road blocked tonight. Photograph anyone who enters. Do not confront armed men. You spent 9 days learning how poorly I follow advice. I spent 9 days learning that you follow orders when they protect other people. She left before I could answer. Darkness reached Greyhaven quickly. I blocked the western road with my truck and dragged fallen branches across the narrowest section. Then I returned to the station. Liberty slept beside the stove. Rook lay between her and the door. I cleaned the fuel from beneath the floor as carefully as I could, packing contaminated soil into sealed metal buckets. The work gave my hands a purpose. Still, my mind returned to the communication log. North Star, the altered plans, Owen's death. Perhaps it was only corporate negligence, buried beneath years of paperwork. Perhaps the people responsible no longer worked there. But Victor Sloan had sent men to contaminate a refuge built for veterans. That was not negligence, that was intention. Near midnight, Rook rose. He did not bark, he stared toward the western wall. Liberty lifted her head a second later. I extinguished the lantern. A vehicle moved slowly beyond the blocked road. Its lights were off. I took the flashlight and climbed the tower. Through the broken glass, I saw a dark truck stop near the trees. 2 men stepped out. One carried a red fuel container. The other held a long object wrapped in cloth. They moved toward the station. I descended and called the sheriff. No signal reached inside the valley. The radio on the station shelf produced only static. The men separated. One approached the orchard. The other disappeared along the western wall. Rook stood beside me. His breathing changed. The same controlled rhythm he used before entering a dangerous building. Liberty began to growl. I touched Rook's harness. You stay with her. He looked at me and refused to move. Outside, glass shattered. A bottle rolled across the floor of the equipment room. Flames climbed the wall. The men had not come to plant evidence this time. They had come to burn Greyhaven to the ground. The fire climbed the western wall faster than dry wood should have burned. Orange light poured through the broken window and moved across the ceiling beams in long, violent shadows. The smell reached me next, gasoline, not diesel from beneath the floor. Gasoline had been splashed across the boards before the bottle came through the glass. This was not meant to frighten me. It was meant to finish the station before anyone could examine the trust documents. I grabbed the fire blanket from beside the stove and threw it over the burning liquid spreading across the equipment room floor. The flames crawled around the edges. Behind me, Liberty barked in panic. Rook remained silent. He stood near the front door, staring toward the darkness outside. One of the men was still there. I pulled the emergency water hose from the wall. My father's notes said the gravity tank on the ridge fed the station during fires. I opened the valve. Nothing happened. I opened it farther. The pipe groaned, then coughed out a thin stream of brown water. The pressure was too weak. Someone had damaged the system. Flames reached the shelves where old rope, oilcloth, and wooden rescue equipment had been stored. I dragged the nearest crates away. Heat struck my face. Smoke gathered beneath the ceiling. Rook, rear room. He did not move. Take Liberty, that command he understood. Rook turned and pushed the younger shepherd toward the sleeping quarters. Liberty resisted until he caught the thick skin near her neck, gently between his teeth, and pulled. I closed the heavy interior door behind them. The station had survived storms, neglect, and nearly a century of salt wind. It would not die because two men with gasoline had been paid to erase it. I took an iron hook from the wall and tore down the burning shelf before the flames reached the beam above it. The shelf crashed onto the floor. Sparks scattered across my boots. I smothered one section with the blanket and stamped another beneath my heel. Something struck the outer wall, the second bottle. It broke near the rear window. Fire rose outside. They were surrounding the station. I ran to the office and grabbed the handheld radio. Static answered. I climbed halfway up the tower stairs, raising the radio toward the broken glass. Greyhaven Station calling County Dispatch, only static. Greyhaven Station calling any Marine channel, nothing. The tower bell rope hung beside me, the bell stones. My father's words returned. Martins said the bell should ring for the living, not the dead. The old station stood beyond the reach of telephones, but the bell had once called rescuers from miles away. I seized the rope and pulled. The bell thundered above me. The sound struck the hidden valley, crossed the ridge, and rolled out over the sea. I pulled again and again. Each ring shook dust from the tower walls. Outside, one of the men shouted. A gunshot followed. The bullet passed through the tower window and struck the opposite frame. Glass fell across the stairs. I dropped beneath the ledge. The bell continued swinging. Its voice traveled into the night. The shooter fired again. The second round hit the bell. A harsh metallic scream replaced the clean tone. Then silence returned. I descended quickly. The western room was fully involved now. Fire had climbed the wall and reached the lower roof. I could not save the station alone, not with the water line disabled. Not while armed men waited outside. I needed to get the dogs out. I opened the sleeping room. Smoke entered immediately. Liberty backed beneath a bed. Rook stood over her. Come on. He looked toward the office. Owen's letter. My father's journal. The trust documents remained on the desk. For one reckless second, I considered leaving them. The deed had already been photographed. Vanessa had sent copies. Lives mattered more than paper. Then I remembered the envelopes. Dozens of names. Last words left by men who believed the station would keep them safe. I could not abandon them to the fire. I pulled a wool blanket from the nearest bed, soaked it beneath the weak hose, and wrapped it around my shoulders. Rook, take her outside through the tidal passage. The tide entrance would still be underwater, but the path above it opened onto a stone ledge high enough to remain dry. Rook knew the way. He looked at the smoke. Then he looked at me. Go, he barked once. It sounded like refusal. I pointed toward Liberty. She needs you. That changed him. Rook moved beneath the bed and guided her out. The two dogs disappeared toward the rear passage. I entered the office. Smoke reduced the room to a dark tunnel. I could see fire moving through the doorway behind me. The desk was only a few steps away. I opened the hidden compartment and swept the letters, journals, and trust records into the canvas emergency bag. Owen's envelope rested on the table. I placed it inside my coat. The communication log from Vanessa followed. A beam cracked overhead. I looked up. The ceiling sagged. I grabbed the bag and ran. The western doorway collapsed behind me. Burning wood struck the desk. The old maps caught fire immediately. Flames moved across the marked coastline, consuming the lantern symbols one by one. I reached the central room. Smoke filled my lungs. The front door was less than 20 feet away. A shadow moved beyond it. One of the men stood outside. He was waiting for me to emerge. I stopped behind the overturned rescue boat. The man fired through the doorway. The bullet buried itself in the boat's hull. I had no firearm. My old surfacer pistol was locked in a storage box inside the truck beyond the blocked road. After leaving the military, I had learned to keep weapons away from where I slept. There were nights when memory and reality stood too close together. The decision had probably saved my life more than once. Now it left me behind an antique boat while an armed man watched the only clear exit. I searched the equipment room. A brass flare launcher hung beside the emergency cabinet. It had been designed to fire signal lines from shore toward wrecked ships. The launcher was nearly as long as my arm. A canvas bag held 3 old cartridges. My father had recorded testing them less than a year earlier. I loaded one. The man outside shouted, "Ward, leave the papers and walk out." His voice sounded familiar. The surveyor who had called Liberty Company Equipment. "You already committed arson," I called. "Do not add murder. You are inside a burning building. No one will know how you died. You shot the bell. Metal breaks in visors." He was right. Northstar had built the story before lighting the first match. A traumatized homeless veteran inherited an unsafe property. He entered an abandoned station alone. A fire began. He panicked. The building collapsed. No one would need to ask difficult questions. But they had made one mistake. They believed the station was empty, except for me. They did not understand what the bell meant. I moved toward the front window, keeping the wall between us. Through a gap in the boards, I saw the second man near the orchard. He was pouring gasoline along the grass toward the apple trees. Wind pushed the flames in that direction. If the orchard burned, the fire might reach the ridge and trap Rook and Liberty above the tide. I raised the flare launcher. The weapon was not accurate. It did not need to be. I aimed at the fuel container beside the man. I fired. The cartridge exploded from the barrel with a deafening blast. The burning flare struck the ground several feet from the container. The man fell backward. Gasoline spilled across the wet grass. For an instant, nothing happened. Then fire raced toward him. He screamed and rolled away. The fuel container ignited. A column of flame rose beside the orchard. The gunman at the doorway turned toward his partner. I charged. I hit him with the full weight of my shoulder. We fell onto the grass. His weapon slid beneath the porch. He struck me in the mouth. Pain flashed through my jaw. I drove my forearm against his throat and pinned him. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 30. His face was narrow, his hair cut close, and a Northstar identification card hung beneath his jacket. His name was Travis Cole, the surveyor. He reached for a knife at his belt. Rook appeared from the darkness. He struck Cole's arm before the knife cleared its sheath. The man cried out. Rook released him immediately, then stood over him with his teeth exposed. Liberty remained near the stone passage. She barked toward the orchard. The second man had risen. Part of his jacket was burning. He tore it off and ran toward the hidden road. I dragged Cole's gun from beneath the porch. The weapon was a semi-automatic pistol. I removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and threw both pieces in different directions. "Where is the water valve?" I demanded. Cole held his injured arm. "I do not know. You shut off the gravity tank." "No. Your people surveyed the ridge this morning." He looked toward the tower. The roof above the western room collapsed. Sparks rose into the night. "Where is it?" He said nothing. Rook stepped closer. Cole's eyes widened. "Old stone cistern above the north slope," he said. The line was cut below it. "With what?" "Bolt cutters." He looked away. "Victor Sloan?" "I never met him." "You carried his instructions." "Through a contractor." "Halcyon?" His face changed. That was enough. A new sound entered the valley. An engine. Then another. Headlights appeared along the western ridge. Cole tried to rise. "Stay down." The first vehicle came through the trees fast. It was not Northstar. A sheriff's cruiser stopped beside the orchard. Aaron Pike stepped out with a shotgun pointed toward the ground. Behind him came a pickup truck, an ambulance, and 2 vehicles from the volunteer fire department. Vanessa climbed from the passenger side of the cruiser. "How did you know?" I asked. "The bell." Aaron looked toward the damaged tower. "My grandfather taught me the old alarm pattern." 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. Then continuous. I had not used any pattern. I had simply pulled until someone shot the bell. Yet the sound had been enough. Fishermen across the bay heard it. One called Aaron, another called the fire department. Greyhaven's oldest rescue system had worked exactly as intended. The firefighters moved immediately. 2 climbed the northern ridge to reopen the cistern. Others stretched hoses from the marsh and began attacking the western room. Vanessa photographed Cole, the weapon, the fuel containers, and the burning path beside the orchard. Aaron placed Cole in handcuffs. The second man had disappeared into the forest. Deputies began searching the western road. I helped carry equipment until a firefighter pushed me toward the ambulance. You inhaled smoke. The station is still burning. And you will be unconscious if you stay inside it. I looked for Rook. He stood near Liberty at the edge of the orchard. Blood darkened the fur above his injured shoulder. At first I thought Cole had stabbed him. Then I saw the wound. A shallow line crossed the old scar near his shoulder blade. One of the bullets had grazed him. I ran toward him. Rook remained standing until I reached him. Then his rear legs folded. I caught him before he struck the ground. No, the word came out like a plea. I pressed both hands around the wound. Blood moved between my fingers. Liberty circled us, whining. The ambulance crew brought a blanket and medical pads. There was no veterinarian in Port Alder after midnight. The nearest emergency animal hospital was more than an hour away. Vanessa took the keys from Aaron's cruiser. I will drive. Aaron started to protest. She pointed toward Cole. You need to preserve the scene. Then she looked at me. Get him in the vehicle. We wrapped Rook in the blanket. He weighed less than he had during our deployments, but carrying him still pulled against every old injury in my back. He made no sound. That frightened me more than the blood. Liberty tried to climb into the cruiser with us. You have to stay, I told her. She refused to move. Vanessa opened the rear door. Bring her. I sat on the floor behind the front seats with Rook's head across my legs. Liberty pressed against his back. Vanessa drove faster than I would have believed possible on the narrow road. Greyhaven disappeared behind us. Flames still rose above the ridge. Rook's breathing became shallow. I pressed the bandage tighter. You are not leaving me, I whispered. His one good ear moved. You hear me? His eyes opened. For years, Rook had followed me into places no animal should have entered. He had crawled beneath gunfire to find a wounded interpreter. He had remained beside me after an explosion destroyed half a wall. He had woken me from dreams before I hurt myself. He had slept in trucks, alleys, cheap motels, forests, and abandoned buildings without once asking why we had no home. I had told him he was getting too old to save me. I had never considered that one day I might be too late to save him. Vanessa looked into the mirror. How is he? He is losing blood. We are 20 minutes away. Drive, she drove. Liberty licked the edge of Rook's muzzle. His breathing steadied slightly. The animal hospital stood beside an empty highway interchange. A technician waited outside with a rolling stretcher. They took Rook from my arms. The doors closed behind him. Blood remained across my hands and coat. Liberty paced the waiting room. Every few steps, she returned to the treatment door and sniffed beneath it. Vanessa sat across from me. Smoke had blackened one side of her face. A tear in her coat exposed the lining near her shoulder. You went back to the station after leaving, I said. I returned to Port Alder first. Why? To get my father's lantern stone. She reached into her pocket. The stone was smooth, dark, and small enough to fit inside her palm. A lantern had been carved into one side. When I picked it up, I noticed scratches beneath the base. She turned it over. Several numbers had been engraved there. They matched one of the coordinates from your father's list. The sheriff's house near it, an old lookout point across the bay. She drove there and found a rusted signal frame aimed toward Greyhaven. Through the trees, she saw the tower light moving. There had been no electric lamp in the tower. The light was fire. Then the bell began ringing. She called Aaron from the lookout. The old network of bellstones had not hidden money. It had created witnesses. Each marked a place from which someone could watch Greyhaven, hear its bell, or guide rescuers toward it. My father had rebuilt a community around the station without placing its survival in one person's hands. Just as he had written, the treatment doors opened. A veterinarian entered the waiting room. She was a tired woman with gray hair pulled through the back of a surgical cap. The bullet did not enter his chest, she said. I stood. It grazed the shoulder and fractured part of the scapula. The blood loss looked worse because the old scar tissue tore open. Will he live? He survived the injury. That was not the same answer. What are you not saying? She glanced at the clipboard. His heart rhythm became unstable under sedation. We found signs of advanced degenerative disease. His age and previous injuries make surgery difficult. What surgery to stabilize the fracture do it? If the heart problem worsens, he may not survive anesthesia. And without surgery, he may heal with strict rest, but he will have pain and limited movement. There is also a risk that a bone fragment could shift. I looked through the small glass window in the treatment door. Rook lay beneath a heated blanket. An intravenous line entered his front leg. His muzzle had turned almost completely silver. I had spent years looking at him as the one constant thing in my life. I knew he was aging. I saw the slower steps and longer rests. But knowing is not the same as accepting. The veterinarian spoke gently. You do not have to decide this second. He hates hospitals. Most working dogs do. He will think I left him. You may sit with him while we monitor his heart. I entered the treatment room. Rook opened his eyes when I touched his paw. His tail moved once beneath the blanket. That small movement nearly broke me. I should have sent you farther away. His eyes remained on mine. I should have seen the man outside. Rook breathed slowly. Every instinct inside me searched for the mistake. The angle I should have checked. The command I should have given. The moment I could have changed. Owen's letter rested inside my coat. Do not build a prison out of the decision that put him in danger. I had spent years believing guilt was proof of love, as though forgiving myself would mean Owen mattered less, as though accepting Rook's injury would betray every time he protected me. The truth was harder. Love could not control every door. It could not stop every bullet. Sometimes love meant remaining beside the wounded, without making their pain about your punishment. I lowered my forehead against Rook's. You chose the door too, I whispered. His breath warmed my face. For the first time since Owen died, I understood the sentence. Not completely. Not enough to erase anything, but enough to let it enter. We stayed that way until sunrise. Rook's heart rhythm stabilized. The veterinarian recommended delaying surgery and monitoring the fracture. He would remain at the hospital for at least 1 day. Liberty refused to leave until a technician moved a bed beside his kennel. The younger dog lay against the bars with her nose near his paw. Vanessa drove me back to Greyhaven. Neither of us spoke during most of the journey. When we reached the western road, dawn had turned the sky pale blue. Smoke hung above the ridge. The station still stood. The western room was gone. Part of the roof had collapsed. The tower leaned slightly toward the sea. The orchard had lost several trees, but the fire crews stopped the flames before they reached the northern slope. Aaron met us near the porch. They had found the second man hiding in a drainage ditch 3 miles away. His name was Nathan Briggs. He worked for a private security contractor owned by Halcyon Strategic Services. Both men carried prepaid phones. The messages had been deleted. A forensic team might recover them. Cole had already requested an attorney. Briggs claimed they had been hired to remove hazardous materials from an abandoned structure. Neither explained the guns. Aaron handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a North Star access card found in Cole's pocket. The card had been issued by the office of Victor Sloan. That ties Sloan to Cole, I said. It proves Cole entered a North Star building. Not that Sloan ordered the fire. Not yet. Vanessa walked toward the damaged station. On the surviving front wall, the words burned into the door remained visible beneath smoke stains. For those who returned from the war but could not find their way home. The fire had blackened everything around them. The words survived. A state investigator arrived before noon, then another. By afternoon, Greyhaven no longer felt hidden. Police vehicles lined the road. Environmental officers tested the soil. Fire inspectors examined the bottles and burn patterns. Reporters gathered beyond the property boundary after hearing that an old maritime rescue station had been attacked. Everett arrived while I was carrying the recovered letters from the station. He stepped from his truck and stared at the ruins. His face lost all color. I did not know, he said. I kept walking. Caleb, I did not know they would do this. You gave North Star the invoices. I gave them financial records. You helped them enter a boundary challenge to force a sale. A sale they could not win honestly. I thought it was pressure. Lawyers' surveys. I did not know they would bring gasoline. I placed the letters inside a dry storage crate. Everett followed. 14 families are about to lose their jobs. Rook was shot. He stopped. What? Northstar sent armed men. Rook took a bullet. Everett looked toward the porch as though expecting to see the dog there. For years, he had complained about Rook entering the family house. He had called him dangerous, but Rook had also found Everett's grandson when the boy wandered away from a picnic. He had slept beneath our father's chair during the final winters of his life. Everett lowered his head. Is he alive for now? The words hurt both of us. Everett sat on a burned section of stone wall. His hands hung between his knees. I signed a preliminary agreement. With Northstar? He nodded. I promised them first access to Ward Marine's commercial dock if they secured Greyhaven. You sold something you did not own. I was trying to save the business. You were trying to save it before anyone discovered how much debt it carried. He looked at me. Dad borrowed nearly everything against that station. Then he forgot making half the loans. No, he documented them. I showed him the trust ledger. Every transfer from Ward Marine to Greyhaven had been recorded. The money was not a hidden personal loan. It purchased materials and labor for a charitable refuge. The trust agreement required reimbursement from future donations or land grants. My father had planned to repay the marina. Everett read the pages. His anger slowly gave way to confusion. He never showed me this. He did not believe you would protect the station. I protected him, I know. The admission changed his face. I sat beside him. You carried him while his memory failed. You kept the marina open. You paid people when the accounts were empty. Dad knew what you did. Then why did he shut me out? Because he knew what fear would make you do. Everett looked toward the Northstar card inside the evidence bag. He had been afraid of losing the company, afraid of failing the employees, afraid that our father's debts would erase everything he spent his life building. Northstar found that fear and turned it into a leash. The same kind of men had used bad intelligence, hidden records, and institutional violence over sea. They did not need people to be cruel. They only needed them to be desperate. I can testify, Everett said. To what? Victor met me in private. He said the station would fail inspection before the boundary hearing. He said once the land became a liability, you would sign. Did he mention fuel? No. Fire. Then it proves pressure, not arson. There is more. He looked toward Helena's vehicle approaching the road. I recorded our final meeting. Why? Because I did not trust him. But you still worked with him. I did not trust myself either. Helena parked beside us. She carried a laptop and several account ledgers from the marina. Everett had told her where to find the recording. The audio was incomplete. Wind and machinery covered several sections, but Victor Sloan's voice could be heard clearly near the end. By tomorrow morning, Greyhaven will no longer be your brother's problem. Once the structure is gone, the trust becomes a story without evidence. Vanessa listened twice. Aaron listened once. The state investigator asked for the original device. For the first time, we had something close to an order. Not enough to prove murder, enough to obtain warrants. By evening, police searched Northstar's regional offices. Victor Sloan could not be found. His home was empty. His company vehicle had been abandoned near a private airfield. The parent company denied knowledge of his actions. Halcyon released a statement calling Cole and Briggs unauthorized contractors. Every organization began separating itself from the men at the bottom. I had seen that pattern before. Responsibility moved downward until it reached someone too poor or frightened to push it back up. Vanessa worked from the surviving office all night, organizing the trust records and preparing an emergency injunction. Helena reconstructed the marina loans. Everett called every employee and admitted that the business was in danger. He expected anger. Instead, several offered to work reduced hours until the case was resolved. 2 fishermen brought generators to Greyhaven. A carpenter arrived with tarps. Aaron's family delivered food. By the following morning, people were repairing the station before any court had decided whether it deserved to survive. That was my father's final rule. Help the next man who arrives. The next man was not always a veteran. Sometimes it was a brother who had made the wrong choice. Sometimes it was a lawyer discovering seeing her father's hidden life. Sometimes it was a frightened dog left inside a truck. Sometimes it was me. The emergency hearing took place 3 days after the fire. I wore Everett's clean shirt because mine smelled of smoke. Rook remained at the animal hospital. Liberty stayed beside him. The courtroom was crowded with reporters. Fishermen, veterans, North Star attorneys, state officials, and families whose names appeared in the Greyhaven journals. Vanessa presented the original federal deed, the active trust amendment, photographs of the fuel contamination, the arson arrests, and the recording of Victor Sloan. North Star argued that Sloan acted without authority. They claimed the company had no knowledge of the fire. They also argued that my father's appointment of me as trustee should be rejected because of my homelessness, employment history, and documented psychological condition. Their attorney never called me dangerous. He did not need to. He described every hospital visit, every job lost, every night spent in my truck, every incident in which police had found me disoriented after a nightmare. He turned the worst years of my life into evidence that I could not protect the place, built for men living through those same years. When my turn came, I walked to the witness stand. The courtroom lights felt too bright. Doors moved behind me, people whispered, my hands wanted to search for exits. I found Vanessa near the front table. Helena sat behind her. Everett sat beside several marina workers. No dog leaned against my leg. I was alone. The North Star attorney approached. Mr. Ward, is it true that you have been without permanent housing for more than 3 years? Yes. Is it true that you have left multiple jobs without notice? Yes. Have you experienced episodes in which you could not distinguish a present sound from a memory of combat? Yes. Have you ever slept with a firearm within reach? Yes. Do you believe those facts describe a person prepared to administer a historic property, charitable trust, environmental site, and public refuge? I looked toward the windows. Rain moved across them. For years I would have answered with anger, or shame, or silence. Instead, I thought about the names carved above the beds. My father did not create Greyhaven for men who had perfect employment records. The attorney paused. That was not my question. No, those facts do not describe someone who appears prepared. Then you agree. They describe someone the station was prepared for. The courtroom became quiet. I continued. I know what it is like to avoid shelters because crowded rooms feel dangerous. I know what it is like to leave a job because a slammed door sends your mind somewhere else. I know what it is like to believe accepting help will make you weak. The attorney stepped closer. And does that qualify you to manage a trust? No. What qualifies you? I stayed when the building burned. He glanced toward the judge. That is an emotional answer. It is the truth. I looked directly at him. Management can be learned. Accounts can be audited. Repairs can be. Lawyers can explain the law. But a refuge like Greyhaven fails the moment the person controlling it begins judging the people who need it. The attorney returned to his table. The judge did not issue a final ruling that day. She granted a temporary injunction protecting Greyhaven from North Star, suspended all boundary work, and recognized me as acting trustee until a full hearing could take place. It was not victory, but the station remained ours. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. I answered no questions. One voice rose above the others. Mr. Ward, what will you do if the court removes you? I stopped. I will help the person who replaces me protect Greyhaven. That answer surprised me. Perhaps it surprised everyone. 3 days earlier, losing the station would have felt like another burial. Now I understood that Greyhaven had never belonged to one man. Not my father, not me. The place survived because each person repaired something before leaving. That evening, Vanessa drove me to the animal hospital. Rook was awake. The veterinarian had decided against surgery. The fracture remained stable, and his heart condition made anesthesia too dangerous. He would heal slowly. He might never run again. He might not climb the tower. But he was alive. When the technician opened the kennel, Liberty stepped out first. Rook followed with one front leg held stiffly beneath a support harness. He took 3 careful steps, then he saw me. His tail began moving. Not once, not faintly, it struck both sides of the kennel. I knelt. He pressed his head against my chest. Liberty pushed between us until I held her too. The veterinarian smiled from the doorway. They have become difficult to separate. I know the feeling. We returned to Greyhaven after sunset. The station had been covered with tarps. Temporary braces supported the tower. Lanterns glowed in the surviving windows. Everett had built a wooden ramp to the porch for Rook. He pretended it was needed for moving equipment. I pretended to believe him. That night I slept on the floor beside the stove. Rook lay against my right side, Liberty curled against my left. For the first time, Greyhaven felt like a home rather than an inheritance. Near dawn, Liberty rose. She walked toward the western wall and began scratching beneath a burned section of floor. Rook lifted his head. I moved the loose boards. Beneath them was not soil. A steel plate had been set into the foundation. The fire had burned away the wooden cover hiding it. At the center of the plate was a lantern mark. I used the small key from my father's desk. The lock opened. Beneath the floor was a shallow stone chamber. Inside stood a waterproof case. It contained photographs, account books, old military insignia, and records from every veteran who had helped rebuild Greyhaven. At the bottom rested a sealed envelope. The front carried 3 names: Henry Ward, Owen Price, Caleb Ward. Inside was a photograph of my father and Owen standing beneath the tower bell. Between them was Victor Sloan. All 3 men were younger. All 3 were smiling. On the back my father had written one sentence. Before Victor learned how much Greyhaven was worth, he was one of the men it saved. I stared at the photograph until the faces lost their meaning. My father stood on the left, younger by at least 20 years. His hair was still dark at the sides, and his shoulders had not yet begun to bend. Owen stood on the right. He looked barely old enough to have carried the responsibilities we later placed on him. His smile was wide, careless, and alive. Victor Sloan stood between them. He was thinner than the man I knew. His expensive coat and carefully controlled expression were gone. He wore a faded military jacket with no insignia, work pants stained with paint, and a wool cap pulled low over his forehead. One of his arms rested across my father's shoulder. The other rested around Owen. He did not look like a developer. He looked like a man who had been given food after going too long without it. Vanessa took the photograph from my hand. When was this taken? I checked the date written beneath my father's note. 16 years ago. That would have been before Northstar was formed. Everett crouched beside the open chamber. What was Sloan doing here? The answer lay inside the records. Victor's name did not appear above any of the beds. My father had hidden it beneath a different name, Vincent Solano. The journal described a former Army intelligence specialist who arrived at Greyhaven after losing his position with a private security firm. He had spent years gathering information in places where every friendship could become a weapon. When he returned home, he trusted no one. He slept with a knife beneath his pillow. He checked the windows every few minutes. He refused to enter the sleeping room because he believed the men already there had been sent to watch him. My father let him sleep in the tower. He gave him no questions, only work. Vincent repaired radios, created secure record systems, and helped mark the bellstones along the coast. He understood how information could protect people. He also understood how it could control them. For nearly 9 months, he lived at Greyhaven. Then a former employer offered him a position overseas. My father begged him not to return to private intelligence work. Vincent left anyway. Several years later, he changed his name to Victor Sloan. He built Halcyon Strategic Services by purchasing small security contractors that had access to military and government operations. After that came Northstar: land, ports, marinas, private airfields. Every property gave Halcyon another route through which people, equipment, and information could move. Greyhaven sat beside the deepest littoral channel on that section of coast. Northstar did not want luxury cabins. The resort plans were a cover. Halcyon wanted a private maritime access point close enough to international waters for vessels to arrive without drawing attention at a commercial harbor. My father discovered the truth after Victor returned to Greyhaven 3 years earlier. Victor did not come seeking refuge. He came with an offer. He told my father the station could become part of a private veterans foundation funded by Northstar. The buildings would be restored. The trust would receive millions. Veterans would continue coming. All my father had to do was transfer control of the shoreline. My father refused. The journal said Victor remained calm until he saw Owen's name above the bed. He asked when Owen had stayed there. He asked what letters he had left. He asked whether I had ever visited. My father understood then that Victor was not merely interested in the harbor. He was searching for records connected to the intelligence failure that killed Owen. The communication plans did not disappear during a server transfer. Victor ordered them deleted. A Halcyon employee had warned him that the building information came from an unreliable source. Correcting the intelligence would have revealed an illegal payment to a local militia commander. Victor chose to protect the operation. Owen died because a company valued its contract more than the men using its information. I felt the old rage return. This time it did not scatter through me. It moved in one clear direction. Victor knew. He had looked at Owen's name in the sleeping room while carrying the truth of his death. He had stood beside my father and pretended Greyhaven had once saved him. Then he tried to burn every record that might expose him. Vanessa turned another page. Your father made copies. Where? He sent them through the Bell network. The coordinates were not only lookout points. Each bellstone marked a family. Former resident, fisherman, veteran, or friend trusted with part of Greyhaven's history. No single person held enough evidence to understand the whole case. Together, they held everything my father had learned from Victor. Information could protect people when it was not controlled by one frightened man. We spent the next 2 days contacting every name on the list. Some numbers no longer worked. Some people had died. Others had moved. But word traveled quickly along the coast. A widow in Camden opened her late husband's safe and found copies of Halcyon invoices. A retired Coast Guard officer brought a sealed package containing harbor surveys that North Star had never submitted to the state. Samuel Green's son arrived from Augusta with a ledger showing donations Victor had made to Greyhaven before he formed Halcyon. Martin Hale's lantern stone contained a tiny brass key. That key opened a locked box in Vanessa's childhood home. Inside were letters from Victor. In the earliest letters, he thanked Greyhaven for saving his life. In the later ones, he warned Martin that the station would be destroyed if the trustees interfered with Halcyon's coastal operations. Victor had threatened the very men who once fed him. The evidence reached state investigators and federal authorities. Warrants expanded beyond the arson. Halcyon offices were searched in 4 states. North Star accounts were frozen. Several executives claimed they had never heard of Greyhaven. Others began negotiating with prosecutors before they were even charged. Victor remained missing. Authorities believed he had left the country. I did not. The station had something he still needed. He had not risked murder to destroy an old deed. He wanted the letters from Owen and my father. More than that, he wanted proof that his younger self had once depended on the people he later betrayed. Men like Victor could survive accusations. What they could not survive was being remembered honestly. The full hearing over Greyhaven took place 2 weeks after the fire. The judge recognized the historic trust, rejected North Star's boundary claim, and placed the shoreline under permanent conservation protection. No private company could build a marina there. No road could cross the marsh without approval from the trust and the state. Greyhaven would remain a refuge. The courtroom applauded. I did not. Rook lay beside my chair wearing a support harness around his shoulder. He had walked into the room under his own strength. That was enough celebration for me. Liberty rested on his other side. The county had completed its investigation into the kennel that reported her dead. Several dogs had disappeared from its records and been sold through unlicensed contractors. The kennel owner was arrested. The humane officer asked whether I wanted to make Liberty's placement permanent. I looked at Rook. He looked at Liberty. She had already decided. Greyhaven now had 2 dogs. The court's ruling did not solve everything. Ward Marine still carried more debt than it could repay. The station needed a new roof, a rebuilt western room, repaired water lines, and a tower strong enough to hold the bell. Everett considered closing the business. Then the families connected to Greyhaven learned what had happened. They came to Port Alder. A carpenter whose father had stayed at the station offered labor. A retired banker helped restructure the marina debt. Fishing crews moved their repair contracts to Ward Marine. A veterans organization began raising money for Greyhaven without demanding ownership or publicity. No single donation saved us. Hundreds of small acts did. People repaired something before leaving. Everett changed, too. He stopped speaking about the marina as our father's business. He called it our responsibility. He gave employees access to the financial records and created a profit-sharing plan that transferred ownership to them over time. The decision cost him control. It also saved the company. Helena converted one of her rental cottages into temporary housing for veterans traveling to Greyhaven. She placed no large sign outside, only a lantern carved beside the door. Vanessa became the trust's attorney. She refused payment during the first year. When I told her that was unreasonable, she said her father had already paid the retainer by repairing the bell. I became Greyhaven's acting keeper. The title sounded too important. Most days, it meant carrying lumber, clearing seaweed from the tidal steps, checking the well, and making coffee before the men in the sleeping room woke. The first veteran arrived 3 weeks after the hearing. His name was Russell Grant. He was 63, recently widowed, and living in a camper behind a closed factory. He had served in the Gulf War. His daughter drove him to Greyhaven and left before he changed his mind. Russell stood in the central room with one bag in his hand. His eyes moved from the windows to the doors. He asked how long he could stay. I told him I did not know. He asked what he had to tell me. I said nothing. He asked what he had to pay. I pointed toward the damaged western wall. Repair something before you leave. Russell stared at the wall. Then he placed his bag beside a bed. For the first week, we barely spoke. We worked. He knew roofing. I knew enough to follow instructions. Everett brought materials. Helena brought food. Vanessa brought legal papers and pretended not to notice when we used them to level an uneven table. Rook spent most mornings beneath the apple trees. His shoulder healed slowly. He no longer climbed steep trails, but his eyes remained sharp. Liberty began training as a search dog under the guidance of a retired handler who had stayed at Greyhaven years earlier. She was quick, curious, and stubborn. Rook corrected her with a glance. She ignored everyone except him. Peace did not arrive all at once. Some nights, I still woke on the floor before understanding where I was. The fire returned in dreams, so did Owen, but he no longer stood inside the doorway asking why I sent him there. Sometimes he sat beside the station stove. Sometimes he drank coffee with my father. Neither man spoke. They did not need to. By early winter, the western room had been rebuilt. The roof was sealed. The gravity tank worked again. Russell repaired the tower stairs and carved his name above the 7th bed. On the morning he left, he placed a new hammer on the workbench. For the next man, he said. Then he drove home with his daughter. That evening, the first major storm of the season appeared beyond the Atlantic. Weather reports warned of hurricane-force winds, coastal flooding, and waves high enough to cross the outer cliffs. We secured the windows and moved supplies to higher shelves. Everett wanted me to evacuate. The sheriff repeated the warning. I agreed that Russell and the other visitors should leave. I agreed Helena should close the cottages. I agreed the marina workers should secure the boats and go home. But I would remain at Greyhaven. The station had been built for storms. Someone needed to keep the radio working and watch the channel. Everett called me stubborn. I told him the trait ran in the family. Vanessa arrived before nightfall carrying blankets and emergency batteries. You should not be here, I said. Neither should you. That is different. It always is when you are the one taking the risk. She stayed. Everett stayed too. Helena arrived with food and refused to leave after both of us argued with her. For the first time since we were young, all 3 Ward children spent the night beneath the same roof. Wind struck shortly after dark. The station shook. Rain moved sideways across the windows. Waves climbed the cliffs and crashed into the hidden tidal entrance. The tower bell began moving on its own. Its repaired voice sounded across the darkness. Near midnight, a distress call came through the marine radio. A small research vessel had lost power near the southern reef. 3 people were aboard. The Coast Guard had dispatched a cutter, but shallow water and debris prevented it from approaching the bay. The vessel was drifting toward the rocks beneath Greyhaven. I climbed the tower with binoculars. Lightning revealed the boat between waves. Its navigation lights disappeared, then returned. The current was carrying it towards below the northern ridge. A modern rescue vessel could not enter. The old Greyhaven surfboat could. We had restored the hull but never tested it in a storm. Everett looked at the boat cradle. No. There are 3 people out there. The Coast Guard is coming. They cannot reach the channel. You do not know that. I know the water. You have lived here for 1 season. And Dad studied it for 30 years. Helena grabbed my arm. I did not flinch. That surprised both of us. You cannot rescue everyone, she said. The sentence came from love. That made it harder to hear. No, I answered, but I can try to reach the people who are in front of me. Everett cursed and pulled on a life jacket. What are you doing? You cannot launch that boat alone. Vanessa took the radio. I will guide from the tower. Helena opened the emergency medical cabinet. I will prepare for injuries. No one asked permission. Greyhaven had made the decision for all of us. Rook tried to follow as we moved the surfboat toward the launch passage. His injured leg slipped on the wet floor. Stay, I told him. He barked. I pointed toward Liberty. Take care of her. The same command that moved him during the fire worked again. Rook remained beside the younger dog. Everett and I dragged the surfboat down the stone path above the tide. A rail system built into the cliff guided the hull toward the water. Waves exploded beneath us. The wind tore words from our mouths. We waited for the surge to fall, released the brake, and rowed the boat down the final section. The ocean struck like a wall. For several seconds we moved backward. Then the oars caught. Everett rowed on one side. I rowed on the other. The old boat rose and fell between black waves. Vanessa's voice came through the radio. She guided us using the tower lantern and the maps my father had drawn. Turn north, hold the line, wait for the next set, move now. Lightning revealed the research vessel, less than 100 yards away. It had struck part of the reef. One side leaned low in the water. A woman clung to the railing. A man waved a flashlight. The 3rd passenger was not visible. We came alongside as another wave lifted both boats. Everett threw the line. The man caught it. The woman shouted that their captain had broken his leg and could not climb. I boarded the sinking vessel. The deck moved beneath me. Water poured through a crack near the stern. I found the captain inside the cabin. A fallen cabinet pinned his leg. Every wave drove more water through the doorway. I lifted the cabinet. The captain screamed. The sound became another voice from another place. For one dangerous instant I saw Owen beneath broken concrete. Smoke filled the room. My hands stopped. Then a bark came through the radio. Rook. He had reached the tower. Vanessa had opened the radio channel. His bark cut through the memory. The cabin returned. Water, wood, a wounded man, a door I had entered by choice. I lifted again. The captain pulled his leg free. Everett helped drag him across the deck. We transferred all 3 passengers into the surfboat. The research vessel struck the reef moments later. Its lights vanished. The return journey was worse. We carried too much weight. Water filled the bottom of the boat. One oar cracked. Everett tied it with a section of rope and continued rowing. The rescued woman bailed water with her helmet. The injured captain lost consciousness. Vanessa kept speaking through the radio. Her voice never shook. The tower light appeared between waves, then disappeared. Then appeared again. The harbor light is on. My father's final message. I had believed he meant the lamp outside his house. He meant more. A light left burning is a promise. It says someone knows you are still out there. Someone expects you to return. Someone has not decided that darkness owns you. We entered the channel. A wave lifted the stern and turned us sideways. The broken oar snapped completely. The surfboat moved toward the cliff. Then a second light appeared above the northern ridge. Another bell station. Aaron Pike had activated the old lookout. A 3rd light appeared across the bay. Then a 4th. The bell network awakened through the storm. Fishermen, families, veterans, and strangers stood at the marked points, guiding us through the darkness. Greyhaven did not depend on one family again. My father had kept his promise. We reached the launch rail shortly before dawn. Helena and 2 firefighters pulled the boat from the water. The captain was taken to a hospital. The other passengers survived with minor injuries. Everett sat on the stone floor, soaked and trembling. I expected him to curse me. Instead, he laughed. It was not the laugh from the attorney's office. It held relief, fear, and something close to wonder. Dad knew, he said. Knew what? That you would take the boat. He knew you would follow. Everett looked at me. For the first time in years, we saw each other without measuring who had suffered more. He held out his hand. I pulled him to his feet. As the storm weakened, Liberty began barking near the western road. Rook stood beside her. A vehicle had stopped beyond the fallen trees. One man stepped from it, Victor Sloan. He wore a dark coat soaked by rain. No weapon was visible. He carried a metal case. Aaron Pike raised his firearm. Victor lifted both hands. I came to surrender. No one believed him. Vanessa approached with the sheriff. Victor's face changed when he saw her father's lantern stone hanging from her neck. Martin kept it. He kept everything, she said. Victor looked toward the repaired tower. You should have let the station burn. I stepped in front of him. You tried that. His eyes moved to Rook, then to Owen's name visible through the sleeping room doorway. I did not order anyone to shoot the dog. You ordered men to destroy the building. I ordered them to remove records with gasoline. They made their own decisions, the old pattern again. Responsibility pushed downward. What is in the case? Aaron asked. Victor placed it on the ground. Inside were company records, offshore account information, operational files, and the original intelligence messages from Owen's final mission. Victor had kept them as protection against his own partners. When federal agents froze his accounts, the files became the only thing he could trade. He had come to Greyhaven because he wanted me to support a reduced sentence. He believed guilt created a debt. He believed I owed him mercy because the station had once helped him. I looked at the man my father tried to save. Did you know the plans were wrong? Victor's face tightened. I knew they were uncertain. Did you approve them? I approved the operation. Did you delete the warning? He looked toward the sea. Yes, the word was almost lost beneath the wind. Owen's death had lived inside me for years as a question. Now the answer stood only a few feet away. I imagined striking Victor. I imagined dragging him toward the cliff. I imagined giving grief the punishment it had demanded. Rook stepped beside me. He did not growl. He leaned against my leg. The same way he had outside the courthouse. The same way he had through every night I nearly disappeared inside myself. My hands opened. I cannot forgive you for Owen, I said. Victor looked at me. That is not mine to give. What will you tell the prosecutor? The truth. Will you ask for mercy? No. His face hardened. Then Greyhaven taught you nothing. I looked toward the words burned into the station door. For those who returned from the war but could not find their way home. Greyhaven offers refuge, I said. It does not erase responsibility. Aaron placed Victor in handcuffs. Federal authorities took custody of him that afternoon. His records exposed illegal surveillance contracts, bribery, false intelligence reports, and financial crimes reaching far beyond North Star. Victor eventually accepted a plea agreement that required him to testify against Halcyon executives. The agreement did not set him free. It made him answer publicly for the choices he spent years hiding. 1 year later, Greyhaven Life-Saving Station reopened fully. The tower bell had been repaired again. The western room became a workshop. The sleeping quarters held 8 beds, though we rarely filled them all. Greyhaven remained quiet by design. No television crews entered without permission. No visitor photographed the veterans. No donor received the right to control the trust. People could contribute money. They could contribute tools. They could contribute time. They could not purchase the stories of the men who came there. A wooden sign stood near the western road. It carried 4 words. The harbor light is on. Rook was 12 by then. He walked slowly and slept more than he once had. Every morning he made one careful patrol from the station to the apple trees. Liberty followed close behind, though she was now strong enough to outrun him without effort. She had become Greyhaven's search dog. When a visitor wandered alone toward the cliffs, she found him. When someone woke from a nightmare and walked into the dark, she followed at a distance until he was ready to return. Rook taught her the most important part of rescue. Do not force the lost person to move. Stay close enough that he does not have to face the darkness alone. On a clear morning in late September, I found Rook beneath the oldest apple tree. He lay with his muzzle across his paws. Sunlight warmed the silver fur around his face. I sat beside him. His breathing was slow. The veterinarian had warned me that his heart would eventually weaken. I had spent months pretending every morning would repeat forever. Rook opened one eye. You found the road, I told him. His tail moved against the grass. You found the station. You found liberty. You found me. I placed my hand against his chest. The heartbeat beneath my palm was faint but steady. I know what comes next, I whispered. You do not have to keep saving me. Rook lifted his head. He placed it across my knee. We stayed beneath that tree until the sun moved beyond the tower. He did not die that day, or the next. Rook remained with me through another winter. But from that morning forward, I stopped fearing the final goodbye enough to miss the days still in front of us. That was the last lesson he taught me. Survival is not the same as living. A man can spend years preparing for loss and never notice that love is still beside him. My father had not left me a drowned piece of coastline. He had left me a light. Owen had not left a sentence. He had left me permission to come home. Rook had not led me to hidden treasure. He had led me to the place where the broken parts of my life could become useful to someone else. And every evening before darkness reached the water, I climbed the Greyhaven Tower and lit the lantern. Not because every lost person would see it, not because every wounded man would return. I lit it because somewhere beyond the cliffs, someone might be driving through the night, sleeping inside a truck, ignoring the telephone, or believing he had disappointed everyone who ever loved him. I wanted that person to look toward the coast and understand one simple truth. The harbor light was still on, someone was waiting, and it was not too late to come home. Greyhaven taught me that the people who appear the most lost are not always asking someone to repair them. Sometimes they need a quiet place, honest work, and one loyal soul willing to remain nearby until they are ready to stand again. We cannot change every painful decision from our past. We cannot keep every person we love beside us forever. But we can choose what their love becomes after they are gone. It can become guilt, or it can become a light that guides someone else home. Thank you for staying with Caleb, Rook, and Liberty until the end of their journey. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss another story from our collection. May your home be filled with peace. May your family be protected. And may you always remember that even in the darkest night, one small light can still show the way back.